We turn now from the rhetoric of the race to the reality of governance. Congress has begun a new round of hearings to get answers to questions the Bush administration refused to answer last year, questions about accountability. The heart of the matter is, how do we know what the people in power are doing with the public's trust and the taxpayers' money if we're kept in the dark? Here's the first of reports we'll be bringing you over the coming months on some of the key hearings on Capitol Hill. You're looking at some of the least known but most powerful people in Congress. The Oversight and Government Reform Committee is the main investigative body in the House of Representatives. It's charged with making sure the government is doing its job and holding the executive accountable. That means searching for waste, fraud, and abuse of power in any federal program. Henry Waxman, who has been in Congress 33 years, has been the ranking member of the committee since 1997.
The meeting of the committee will please come to order.
He took the chairman's gavel last year when the Democrats won control of Congress.
It's almost like having a policeman on the beat. If no one thinks they're being watched and being held accountable, they think they can get away with anything. And with this administration, the Bush administration, it's particularly dangerous because they've operated with enormous amount of secrecy. And they really did not want the Congress or the American public to know what they were doing.
If you raise your right hand, do you
Waxman has a long history of digging. He put those 7 tobacco company chiefs under oath in 1994 when he chaired a subcommittee on health and the environment.
How many smokers die each year from smoking cigarettes?
I will explain.
No, I want your answer. We have a limited time.
I do not know.
Those hearings began to unravel the tobacco industry's claim that smoking was perfectly safe.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive. I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
You've been around this town now over 30 years. You've seen it all since Watergate. Is this different?
I think it's much different. In fact, I think this administration is more secretive than the Nixon administration, which was obviously very, very secretive and didn't want to be held accountable and fought all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court not to make information available to the Congress. They've used the term executive privilege. When Nixon used it, people were shocked. Now they just throw around executive privilege quite easily to say, no, Congress isn't entitled to that information.
Today's hearing has been called to investigate allegations of misconduct at the General Services Administration.
Waxman's committee held 40 hearings last year. It's understandable if you missed a few. This one, for example.
And I'm very pleased to welcome the Honorable Loretta A. Doan.
Loretta Doan is no household name, but she is one powerful woman. She runs the GSA, the General Services Administration, the largest broker of goods and services for the federal government. She manages nearly $500 billion of our tax dollars.
I think that's the kind of thing that Congress ought to be looking at because people work hard for their money. And whether you're a liberal or a conservative or whatever you call yourself, you shouldn't want to see it wasted.
Loretta Doan was herself once a government contractor, providing surveillance equipment for border security and other projects. A big contributor to Republican campaigns, she was appointed by President Bush in 2006. Leaks from inside the GSA began to raise eyebrows.
We heard that Loretta Doan, who was the head of the agency, who had only been there 6 months at the time, was trying to give a special contract to a friend, a personal friend, rather than have competition. And secondly, we heard that she was also giving a contract or directed people to give a contract to, I think it was Sun Microsystems,
right,
even though her own employees were telling her that the government's not getting a good deal, they're overpaying for these services. So with these two issues, we felt it was important to call her in. Her own Inspector General had criticized the way she was operating, and we wanted to hear what she had to say.
I refused to yield, and I still believe that my actions were right. But I'm going to tell you, I'm not a perfect person. I make mistakes, and honestly, I'm probably going to make a few more. But there was no wrongdoing.
As they combed through the documents looking for possible sweetheart deals, Waxman's investigators came upon a real surprise. A PowerPoint presentation given at her supposedly nonpartisan agency by Karl Rove's White House deputy, Scott Jennings.
Can you tell us what, if anything, these slides have to do with the GSA's core purpose of procuring supplies and managing federal buildings?
This brown bag luncheon, I believe, has been mischaracterized. This is a meeting that is a team-building meeting that is hosted by our White House liaison, a GSA employee, a non-career employee, and it's hosted every month.
Well, when the presentation begins with the White House Office of Political Affairs on the cover slide, and the slide presentation has multiple references to the Republicans' vaunted 72-hour get-out-the-vote effort and its impact on a host of different congressional races, which is what's contained on the other slides that are in this presentation, I think the American taxpayers have a very good reason to wonder whether the only team that was being helped during this briefing was the Republican Party team.
It's a violation of what's called the Hatch Act. You're not supposed to be doing partisan politics when you work for the government as a way to try to keep people insulated from the old days when the machines used to insist that government employees work for the party.
You've suggested that this wasn't intended to have a partisan purpose in your presentations, and yet the committee has been informed by multiple sources that after Mr. Jennings finished his presentation, you took the floor, thanked him, and then posed a question to the entire group of participants. And according to those sources, you stated, how can we use GSA to help our candidates in the next election? Now, reminding you that you are under oath, can you tell the committee whether, in fact, you did make that statement?
I do know that I'm under oath, and I will tell you that honestly and absolutely, I do not have a recollection of actually saying that.
And she said, you know, I was there. I was pretty sure I was there, but I don't recall ever saying anything. In fact, unless I looked at my calendar, I'm not even sure I was there.
I don't know how many times I've said this, fourth or fifth time, but I will repeat again that I do not recollect this. I honestly and absolutely have no recollection.
Waxman called her back a second time and pulled no punches.
It's unusual for me to ever call for the resignation of a federal official, but in your case, I don't see any other course of action. I would urge you to resign.
But Ms. Doan is still in office, isn't she?
She's still in office, and I think we've got to ask that question again of the administration. Why is she still there if she violated the law, and why is she still there if she gave sweetheart contracts misusing taxpayers' dollars?
It's one of the mysteries Waxman hopes to solve this year. There are many more. You turned over a lot of rocks last year. Was there a pattern to what you kept discovering?
I think what we found that was most dramatic to me was that there has been a huge increase in the amount of activities that the government has contracted out.
We call that outsourcing?
Well, outsourcing. And there's nothing wrong with it if we're getting a better deal. Oftentimes we can contract out the work and pay a lower price and get good quality. But we're now at the point of $400 billion contracted out each year, $200 billion of which goes to contractors without any competition.
How can that happen? Why no competition?
Well, when we first asked that question about Halliburton's activities in Iraq, they said, well, we didn't have time to have competition. We later found out that some of the potential competitors complained that they would have liked to have bid, and they could have bid for the work, and if we had competition, we would have gotten a lower price and better quality. But it got to the point where the government was contracting out, trying to figure out what work should be done. And then they wanted to contract the work itself. Now, they needed to oversee whether the money was being used effectively, so they wanted to go to private contractors to do that as well. Well, that's an invitation to a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse.
Did you find fraud, waste, and abuse in that process?
Yes, we found billions of dollars that cannot be accounted for, that cannot be justified, and it's a scandal.
A scandal made worse, says Waxman, because the person who should be cleaning it up, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, has not been forthcoming with the committee. Her Republican allies on the committee said she was too busy to testify.
Given the number of House and Senate committees with far more direct jurisdictional claims on her time than ours, this president would make testifying up here her full-time job. to the detriment of our national security and stature.
We want to ask her questions and get them on the record. I think the American people are entitled to that, and I respectfully disagree with you.
Secretary Rice finally appeared to testify under oath last October after 8 letters of request and a subpoena.
And it was clear from Secretary Rice's testimony she didn't see any reason why she was supposed to keep people honest in her department. Because she didn't see that as her job. Well, it was her job, and ultimately became our job to make sure that they're acting with integrity and with openness and accountability.
My question, Madam Secretary, is for you to put yourself in my shoes. I'm home in my district. I'm standing in front of a town hall meeting of hard-working American men and women who are paying their taxes. Many of them punch a clock for their time. They're accountable for their time and for their money. And how do I explain that the IG says that $1.2 billion is missing that was supposed to train the police, the most critical of our missions to help stand up? And how do I explain $4.2 million for a swimming pool that has never been used?
You can tell your constituents this is not a matter of having lost the money. This is a matter of invoices, as I am told by the people who are doing this. This is a matter of invoices and records that were not solid enough for us to be confident that the goods and services were being billed properly. This was a Department of State audit of its own procedures that came under new management because there were problems in the Bureau of I&L. And that's very often the case with many of the things that have been mentioned here. It is the department that finds problems and then seeks to fix them.
And when Condoleezza Rice came before your committee, she said that's the money's not really missing, it's an accounting problem.
She's very skillful. And she is knowledgeable that members have 5 minutes to ask questions, and if she can stall for 5 minutes, she'll get to somebody who might be friendlier in the next line of questioning. But she was evasive.
Secretary Rice, one of my concerns as we look at Iraq is that our troops are sacrificing their lives. Our nation's spending hundreds of billions of dollars to prop up a regime in Iraq that looks like it's fundamentally corrupt. Our committee held a hearing on the corruption in Iraq. And at this hearing, we heard from Judge Radi Hamza al-Radi. And Judge Radi described a rising epidemic of corruption inside the Maliki government that is even funding the insurgency and undermining any efforts of political reconciliation.
The Iraqi judge, Radi Hamza al-Radi, was appointed by the U.S. government to root out fraud and corruption in the Iraqi government.
I assume you are aware, Secretary Rice, the Judge Radi told us his investigators had identified an enormous sum, $18 billion, that corrupt Iraqi officials have stolen. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware of Judge Radi's testimony to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. He also told us that 31 people on his staff were brutally assassinated when they tried to investigate these corrupt officials. Were you aware of that?
I'm aware of his testimony to you, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Radi told this committee that Prime Minister Maliki used secret orders to stop investigations of corruption of top Iraqi ministers, including al-Maliki's own cousin, Salam al-Maliki, the former Minister of Transportation. Do you know whether this is true?
Let me say that everything that has been brought to the attention of either various boards in Iraq or to our people is being investigated.
So you're aware of this allegation, and you're aware that there's...
I am not personally following every allegation of corruption in Iraq, Mr. Chairman, but I am certain that we are tracking these allegations of corruption because no one is more concerned about allegations of corruption in Iraq. No one is more concerned about what is, in fact, a pervasive problem of corruption than we are.
I was so stunned when finally she admitted that somebody at the State Department should have been looking after these things. And I said to her, but you're the secretary. You're in charge of the State Department. You're the one who should be making sure that the job is being done. But I think it was a rare moment of candor.
Will you rescind the directive that prevents the State Department employees, high-ranking State Department employees, coming here and discussing in great detail the levels and degree of corruption in Iraq?
I'm here talking right now about corruption in Iraq, about concerns of corruption in the ministries, concern in corruption in particularly the Ministry of Interior.
In very vague terms, though, Madam Secretary,
I'm here
with all due respect.
talking about specifically about our concerns about corruption. Now, I want to renew the offer that I made to the chairman, which is that any document that relates to this, any official who might have knowledge of those documents is available to you at any time, anywhere in closed session.
I said, in closed session, that would mean we couldn't tell the American people about it. And we said, we have to refuse that. She said, well, I've rejected the previous position that I've taken. Yet we didn't get any further cooperation from the State Department, but she acted as if she understood what we had to say and she was going to change things. And then, of course, she didn't change it at all.
You pressed her hard on that.
We did press her hard on it because, after all, we're fighting in Iraq to sustain that government. The president has said they're our allies, and that's that our men and women are in Iraq trying to keep them in power.
What did you think when Secretary Rice said to you, and I'm quoting, well, it's a young government?
It's a young government. It's a government that comes out of a dictatorial past. It's a government that has oil wealth, which we know sometimes leads to corruption. And it's a government that's fighting a war.
I mean, would you agree that patience is called for there?
Well, I think we need to be patient, but we need to be firm enough to say to them that they can't establish themselves as a viable government if they're losing so much money to the insurgents through fraud and corruption, and they can't unify their own country if the people in Iraq see a government that is so corrupt. You have to ask, what are we doing there?
Some of the most heated questions put to the Secretary of State last October had to do with the oversight of the private security company known as Blackwater, hired by the State Department to provide protective services in Iraq. Blackwater first came to public attention 3 years before, when 4 employees were killed in Fallujah. Their burned and mutilated bodies were dragged through the streets and hung from a bridge over the Euphrates River. The U.S. retaliated by attacking Fallujah, a battle that marked an escalation of violence and an influx of insurgents. Early last year, lawyers for the men's families asked for a probe, and then the relatives appeared before Waxman's committee.
The few minor things that they were promised when they took that employment were taken away from them, every single one of them. If they'd had that armored vehicle, if they'd had that rear gunner, if they'd had a map, I think it's referred to as is it a black zone or a red zone? The military would not even go in there with the heaviest equipment over there. It was so dangerous.
What would each of you ask Blackwater to do to help you come to terms with the loss that you've suffered?
Just the truth. Basic truth. We live in the best country in the whole wide world. Why can't we have the basics, what we were built on, the truth? God and truth.
I would like an account from start to finish of that day. Whether I want to hear it or see it, I would. Every minute of it, every part of it, the truth.
They showed such a callous disregard for life. And now they claim we have no rights, that we don't have the right to sue them. I don't know about you, but I am outraged. Where is your outrage?
What did you think and listen to?
Well, I thought that they were treated so poorly by Blackwater. Blackwater wouldn't give them the information about how their loved ones had actually died. They said, sue us if you want this information. And then when they were sued, they countersued. Imagine countersuing people who have lost a son or a husband. But then when we got the emails internal emails from Blackwater, where it was clear that people in Blackwater knew they didn't give these boys the gunners to protect them, the type of vehicles that should have been sufficiently armored. They didn't even give them the map the area. They stumbled into Fallujah. Well, that just seemed to me a shocking way that Blackwater had mishandled protecting their own troops, living up to their own responsibilities to the people that work for them.
And it's happening over and over. It didn't just happen to our 4 men.
Well,
it's like the Wild West over there. What I don't understand is how our government can hire corporations like Blackwater knowing that they refuse accountability. I mean, what does that say about us as a country, as a nation?